How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today we're talking about the Mana Vault Anniversary Event, a cEDH 10K with 148 players that just took place this past weekend at the Mana Vault in Milwaukee. I was there. It was a super awesome event. I'm going to break down kind of my experience there. Probably not going to talk too much about my tournament stuff in this video. I have a Rog Thras guide coming up where I'll probably talk about some of that a little bit more. Having to restart that video, it was almost done, but the deck has changed so much in like 2 weeks that I'm having to restart. So there you go. If you're wondering why that hasn't come out yet. But this was a great event, ton of fun. It was a blast to be out there. Mana Vault's an awesome store. I'm going to kind of give a breakdown of what I thought of that and the community and stuff over there. But today we're going to be taking a look at the top 16 of this event. There's some pretty interesting stuff here. There's some cool tech and some old decks. There's some decks I've never covered before. There's decks I even saw at the event and I didn't get to see them do anything. So I literally, I saw them there. I know that they top 16. Still was a mystery to me what they do. So we're going to discover a little bit of that together. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know down below which of these decks were your favorite, what tournament coverage you want to see me do going forward. I've been hearing people want more of the coverage. Sometimes I pull back from it. Just let me know what you want. Thank you as always to my amazing patrons over on Patreon. On top of like other recording stuff and some tech issues, I've gotten a little bit behind on getting some of the Patreon rewards out. So if you are waiting on your stuff, I promise I'm going to get you your stuff that you need and more. Starting to do a lot more coaching, both through Patreon and outside of Patreon, that you can reach out to me for, especially people who are interested in learning Rog Thras. Keep reaching out to me. If that interests you, reach out to me. I really enjoy doing coaching. It usually is like, you know, I charge for an hour, but I usually end up talking like 2 hours or more to people just because I really enjoy getting to talk to the decks and helping people out. So if that interests you, reach out to me. Or if you know a good cEDH coach that you would recommend to other people, talk about that in the comments or have them reach out to me. I would love to do ads for cEDH coaching. Or if you're interested in having a cEDH event that you're running, get talked about here on the channel, either in a tournament breakdown or running an ad for your tournament that's coming up, reach out to me and we can make something happen, get players to see your event because there's lots of tournaments happening. If you want yours to get seen, you got to get it out there. So, and I think with all that being said, let's go ahead and hop into it. If you want to play cEDH and win some big prizes, check out the Heisenberg. This cEDH event will have up to 200 players competing for $10,000 in prizing. Hosted by Tavern of Souls Gaming, you can spend the weekend jamming games April 19th and 20th in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's even featuring community favorite Baldy as your head judge. I always recommend going to as many big cEDH events as you can. So whether you're a grinder or a brand new player, you owe it to yourself to try to make it out. Have an amazing time and see if you have what it takes to take the whole thing down. Find out more and get your ticket before they're all gone at the link in the description below. So before the tournament breakdown, I do want to talk about my experience at the tournament. So if you're not interested in any of the non-gameplay stuff, you're just a little goober and all you care about is, oh, what top 16 in this top 16 video, then skip to the next chapter or whatever. But I really wanted to talk about the Mana Vault, Adam, and the owner of the Mana Vault, the community that they have there. It is all really incredibly impressive. The Mana Vault is easily the coolest LGS that I've been to. I guess it's not really a local game store to me because I had to fly to it. Coolest GS that I've been to. You walk in and there's a Thassa's Oracle and an ad nauseum just painted onto the wall. Like you're immediately like, oh, this is a cEDH store. This is so sick. Amazing selection of singles. Foil Japanese Snap, that I was super excited for, it, OG one. And you can really see going there that the post-ban cEDH kind of slump and issues with attendance and community sentiment is just not a factor there. They have such a passionate community and it could be easy to say like, oh, that's just, you know, luck. It just happens to be the right scene where they're in Milwaukee or whatever. But I don't think you get that without just putting in the work, which they have been. Like Adam, before he was a store owner, worked on the Sad Naz podcast, was just a part of Top Deck and I guess Eminence with, I think, their streams and helping with some event stuff. And it's just been a part of the community. He's been on the ground floor for a very long time at this point. And you don't get that kind of success at a local level without putting in the work. He mentioned to me that they have, I think this was like their 22nd event. I think it was something like that, 20 something. And he says since the 6th one, every single one is capped. And those are usually like 64 player tournaments. This one was 148. And you don't have that happen just because you kind of luck into it. You got to get players interested and invested and give them an environment where they feel like they want to keep playing and you meet their passion. You're not just giving them a space to just come in and sit at a table and then, you take their money and then you give 4 to 16 of them a bit of money at the end. There's a lot more to it than that, and getting people to keep coming to your store and people to be willing to like travel out to it. Players who were on the wait list showed up just to get a chance to play for this event because it capped and had a bunch of people on the wait list and people just wanted a chance to play there. To me, it's like super inspiring. It makes me want to work harder at my local scene and try to get more players there, because seeing what you can do if you put the work into it, like Adam and his team have, it is really awesome to see, especially right now when stuff more in my region, I hear like about events in Tennessee that used to cap are just not even firing anymore. Like a lot of gold events just aren't quite getting there. Ticket prices are having to be a little bit higher because they're expecting worse turnouts. And seeing just the exact opposite over there, it looks like cEDH is at its peak. Not sponsored by Adam and the Mana Vault. I do owe them an ad though, because their tournament capped before I could even get an ad out on the last one. That's how excited people are for that. He's getting another free ad on any event of his choice at some point. But this is not an ad. This is not paid for. Adam and the Mana Vault, amazing. The crew there, the store itself, everything about my experience there was awesome. Now that I'm done gushing about that and how jealous I am of the hard work that they've put in, let's take a look at the meta breakdown. Okay, our stats are only slightly wrong, I think, because I know Sam Black's list didn't show up for Rock Thras. He topped the event somewhere in top 16, but his list didn't get submitted right, so these stats are wrong. Tymna Kraum, most popular deck, not super surprising. 4 top cuts, 13 entries, 30.76% conversion rate. That's a great performance. I've kind of been talking about it, how after like the first month-ish, or maybe a little bit more, like 6 weeks of the bans, it really seemed like TNK was put into a really great position. There are a lot of people who are just playing very safe piles that are playing to kind of, hedge the averages of, I'm going to draw slightly more cards than everybody else. My card quality slightly higher than everybody else. I think the payoff for that is seeming a little bit weaker in my gameplay experience. But in terms of tournament results, it's really hard to argue that TNK is not the best performing on average right now. It's just, if you want to convert, seems like the way to go, kind of where we were pre-ban, especially right before Roxai was really peaking and Nadu was also kind of crushing some stuff. TNT, as usual, not doing all that well. Kind of a bum deck, to be honest. I have a very low opinion of this deck when I play against it, but it does do some stuff. We got 1 in the top 16 here, 8% conversion rate, 12 entries. 1 Kinnan. So you see there's not a lot of multiples. You have the 4 TNKs and then 1 Sisay, 1 Magda, 1 Roxai, 1 Raffine, 1 Marneus, 1 Jhoira, 1 Livio Thrasios, 1 Volo Agent of the Iron Throne, 1 Yidris, and then there was 1 Rog Thras that hasn't been properly submitted yet. Maybe that'll be fixed by the time you guys see this. Popular decks that did not have any conversions, we had 6 Hashatons, 4 Glarbs, 3 Urikos, some Plagons, Kark Thrases, and then a lot of 2s, like a lot of 1s and 2s. You can see, oh, I guess there was a Chatterfang. It's a little top heavy with the decks that converted having a lot of, 12, 10, 8, 6, 6. But then there is like a lot of 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, stuff like that. So relatively diverse, still a lot of Tymna, a lot of Thrasios, and different combinations and pairings of those. Fairly standard meta breakdown, I think, though, for the most part. All right, as is tradition, I'm gonna move through these quick as I can. I mean, basically this is just a little joke that we have that I say I'm gonna do it faster than the video's an hour and a half anyways. If any of these decks aren't right because they got submitted wrong, don't blame me, blame the person who submitted it. All you had to do was copy and paste the right thing. I'm just working with what I got. I even went and dug through the archives of my DMs with Sam Black and got Sam's list, which hopefully will be updated and available publicly, but I'll have it in the description either way. Let's get into it. Our 16th place deck, we've got a TNK. We are on the Teferi, Mockingbird, DRC, Fairy Mastermind, Delny Facebreaker. So this is starting to become more popular, not so much the DRC, but Fairy Mastermind, Delny Facebreaker is starting to be a package that I see quite a bit in TNK lists that are more into the Tymna plan, like running this kind of stuff over like Loyal Apprentice and things like that, just leaning into the farmy style game plan. Fairy Mastermind is just, when engines are popular, it's pretty good. Bad in Bowmasters, of course, but that's life. I mean, as a Tymna player anyways. And then fairly standard stuff for the rest of it. Abolisher, Ranger Captain, Flood Caller, nothing else really standing out for the creature package. Sorceries, we are on the Jessica's Will as well as Wheel of Fortune, which shouldn't be surprising. It's more that in the Japanese lists I look at, they barely run Wheel at all, but we do have the J-Will. That's really the only standout here. Meme Bets here, only the 1 wheel. We're on the Savines deck, of course. Instance, we are on the Offer, Culling the Weak, which I still think is quite good, but like seems like some people are a little less keen to run now. The Born, of course. Tainted Pact. We're on Flare of Duplication, which gets like some marginal upside when you start running like DRC. I guess Facebreaker too. Still expect that I'm having to hardcast this probably above 50% of the time, but when you do get to do it for free, it's probably pretty insane. Flare of Duplication is obviously just a really powerful, just like you could just run Fork or whatever, and it would probably be good a decent amount of the times. As long as you can produce double red, probably going to be happy with it at least a decent amount of the time. Both Forces, Intuition, Nas. We're on the Swords, no Path. Artifacts, we are on the Amber, which has become a little bit less popular in TNK. Felwar Stone Signet, and then this Talisman. And then we got Imposter Mech as another clone. You will notice there was no Fimage or Metamorph up here. I think that can make sense if you're doing the Imposter Mech. Fimage definitely has been less of a staple. Now usually you see Mockingbird and then Metamorph for TNK. Imposter Mech over the Metamorph slot makes sense, especially if you're prioritizing copying things like Bowmasters or other engines that you know are weak to Bowmasters. So I mean it makes sense. Wishclaw, we don't have the One Ring here. Enchantments, we have kind of the old staple 5. They are on the Necropotence. We've heard tales of it not being quite that good into the current metagame and it performing worse than decks without it. I don't know. Maybe just win. Maybe just a skill issue. 27 lands. We are on the Cavern of Souls, which gets a little bit of upside with the extra creatures we were on there. Spire of Industry. This is a command tower. Nothing else too wild in the mana base that I can see. And yeah, relatively standard TNK. Fairy Mastermind is a card that maybe expect to see more of going forward. Seems pretty popular, you know, overlaps with Delny, Facebreaker, stuff like that. So something to keep in mind. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. Next, we've got Chungus Humongous with Kinnan on the Tezzeret, Invasion of Ikoria, whole bunch of dorks, another Fairy Mastermind, although they do sometimes use it to force people to draw to win the game at the end, doing like endurance loops. We got the endurance there too. Gilded Drake, Spellskite, both of the Drakes. Thrasios is an outlet that we can find, of course. We are on the Spirit Guide. Clever Impersonator, a clone that we've talked about. Pretty nice to be able to like Kinnan flip into, you know, Ristic Study or especially Smothering Tithe. If they get a Smothering Tithe with Clever Impersonator, it is brutal. High Fate Trickster is another Flash Enabler. And then for the monsters, kind of looking like the older package that we would see. You know, Seedborn, Archaic, Consphinx, Hullbreaker, and Tidespout we expect. Same thing with Nyx Bloom. Nezahal has become pretty much a staple of these. And then Thorn Mammoth, which is kind of older and some decks aren't on. We saw this more, I think, going into like when Wounded was first playing his. And I think some of the more stacks focused, like big flips list were on Thorn Mammoth. We have seen different builds that are leaning a little bit back and are not quite as big, but here we're pretty heavy on the top end. Sorceries, 4 tutors. That's about usually what you expect. I mean, all of them pretty good. Instance, we got the Pact Offer again. Dispel. Into the Floodmaw is a bounce spell. Crop Rot is busted. Dramatic Reversal, which is starting to become pretty popular in Kinnan. It's just a big, massive ritual if you have a decent amount of rocks. Swan Song, different counter spells. Misdirection, Commandeer. These are kind of becoming pretty popular in more control-oriented Kinnans, which is most of the ones that are doing well. Especially, and then when I start to see these, I start thinking like we're probably going to look down here and see like Copy Artifact and Mirror Maid and Steel Enchantment, Copy Enchantment. We'll probably see some combination of those. Artifacts, we do have 17. Only real notable one is none of them. These are just all Kinnan staples. Ring, Mirage Mirror to Mana Filter, do other weird stuff with it. Moon Silver Key as a tutor. Basalt is, you know, our main thing we do. Enchantments, yeah. There's the Mystic Ristic, Copy Artifact, Steel Enchantment, Copy Enchantment, Mirror Maid. Yep, this is what they do now. Really prioritizing flexibility and the ability to just see more engines. Kinnan is another deck that can't reasonably tutor for Ristic Study or more traditional card draw engines. And so having just more access to them, and especially flexible ones that can also copy things or steal things that you don't get to run, like I mentioned with Steel Enchantment, or, you know, give a Kinnan a Necropotence. I'm sure they'll pop off with it, things like that. 27 lands total. We've got the E-Zone, Manamo, Cradle. So for this mana base, I think there was a tendency, I've kind of mentioned before how some Kinnan mana bases look just outright non-functional with how many random utility lands and things they would be running, like Homeward Path and all this other junk, to the point where they just like so many colorless lands and monocolor lands that it looked really rough. But this looks like a pretty clean mana base. Definitely like this style of mana base more than every utility land, and just hoping that it works. Here we got Jhoira, for real, for real. I mean, a pretty popular commander historically. When Dockside was around, decks like this did struggle, but we did also see like people who said like, oh, Urza and Jhoira and Sithis or whatever post Dockside, they're gonna pop off. Of course they didn't, because these were lying, delusional people. But you now don't have to worry as much about just throwing the game. Now the things that you're throwing the game to, they're already in play. If there's a Rhystic or Mystic in play and you can't pay, then you might have to worry about throwing the game, because you are a Storm deck that kind of just has to churn because you're relatively low card quality. And all you get to do is see more cards. But now you don't have the coast is clear currently, throw a bunch of stuff out. Oh, I lose the game, because now anybody tutors and the game is over, because tutor for Dockside, make 15 treasures, just wins the game. So it is nice that those decks don't get punished for developing too much. That's things like Culling Ritual, stuff like that. That doesn't hurt the Jhoira as much, but it does. I mean, it can, and it does probably give the game to somebody else. But now it's not every single deck in the format that just can win after you try to go off and can't and are unsuccessful. So for the creatures, we've got outlets and probably just good cards like Walking Ballista. Another thing you got to worry about in this deck is Orcish Bowmasters. Cast 3 spells, your Jhoira is dead, so we gotta be careful. We've got Goblin Welder to be able to weld things in and out. Enthusiastic Mechanaut, which makes our artifacts cost 1 less. We're on the Thassa's Oracle as just a clean way to win at the end. Therian Sculptor, Mirror Retriever pulls back an artifact when it dies. Reality Chip, this is a card I've been seeing a little bit more of in like Rog Thras too. Just decks that want another engine and are in like low color blue decks that can't really tutor for them. Especially in Jhoira, where so much of your deck is just free stuff that gets you to the next card. Being able to see your top card and play that, plus just getting to draw a card when you do that most of the time, is just really nice. It itself is an artifact. It's historic. Bergie gonna net us mana. Emery just a sick magic card and gets us a little bit of value, does a little bit of milling. I'm not sure how much of a graveyard we're using. We see a little bit of it. Foundry Inspector makes our artifacts cheaper. Glaring Fleshraker, on top of making your artifacts cheaper, kind of like the most powerful way you can do it by sitting or getting mana that sits around. This can also be an outlet if you just have any 2 artifacts you can bounce over and over. Any kind of loop like that just wins you the game. Tutors like Impercruiter. Junk Diver is another thing to get an artifact back when it dies. That's a really cool looking one. Liberator's the Flash Enabler. Metalworker is going to potentially be a dork that gets us a ton of mana because there's so many. Shimmer Mirror is a Flash Enabler. Cricket Mage is a tutor. Workshop Assistant, when it dies, return another target artifact from graveyard to your hand. Just a whole lot of that effect, doing the KCI type thing. Ancestral Statue, we usually see this in like Animar, where if you reduce the cost enough, you can play this, return it to your hand. So if you get this down to 0, if you're able to go mana neutral on it, you can just play it over and over and draw your deck. Place Kitten, which is just nuts. Joy's Familiar, another reducer. Metamorph Urza, which is a reducer, and really one of the stronger ones too, because it gets you blue mana, gets you an outlet, does a whole lot of good stuff. Fabricate as a tutor for our 1 sorcery. Instance, relatively lean. We need a lot of artifacts and artifact enablers. Not a lot of instants do that. We've got Interaction, Mana Drain even, Fierce Swat, Sink into Stupor, Paradoxical Outcome. This is like the perfect deck for this. No Force of Will or Force of Negation. If you look at our creatures, you can see a relatively low blue count for creatures. You got like 1/7 here. Only 1 sorcery. Most of our other blue instants are counter spells anyways. And then you're going to see barely any blue down here. Not a lot here. So like the blue count, not the highest. So it might make sense not to do it. And again, you don't want too many pieces of interaction, because if you're chaining spells and then you hit Force of Will doesn't trigger your Jhoira. So the chain just stops there. 34 artifacts. We're not talking about all of them, of course, but we've got ones that make mana, ones that stop our opponents but don't hurt us, like Grafdigger's Cage. Often it's going to be free too. So consider that most of these are mana neutral to positive and draw a card. Since they stop, sure, we can combo with this. We can do some nonsense, I'm sure, because we get Helm of Awakening, tops 1 less. We have ways to cast spells off the top of our library. That just wins the game. Soul Ring, the keys, which are obviously quite strong in an artifact focused deck. Helm of Awakening makes our stuff cheaper. Lightning Greaves to protect our Jhoira. That also prevents us from getting Bowmastered out. Sure, maybe they'll Bowmaster us literally to death from 40, but the gap from, oh, they hit 3 to, oh, they literally killed me, pretty big. You'll probably figure out something if you're drawing 20 to 30 cards. You might find something before the Bowmasters kill you. Ashnod's Altar. We do have the KCI, so we are doing KCI shenanigans. Repurposing Bay. This is a new one that's pretty cool. It's 2 and a blue, 2 tap, sacrifice another artifact, and then you Birthing Pod that artifact. So if I sack a Grim Monolith, I could go get a Basalt Monolith or a Sculpting Steel or whatever it is in the world that I want. That costs 3. not everything in the world. Sculpting Steel, which is enters as a copy of an artifact. Semblance Anvil, you can imprint a card. Spells that share a type with that card cost 2 less, so you imprint an artifact, your artifacts cost 2 less. Crystal Skull is a cool one. 2 blue, you may look at the top card of your library anytime. You can play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of your library, which is artifacts, legendaries, sagas. It's really similar to Mystic Forge, but it's probably a little bit more flexible than Mystic Forge. It's pretty similar. Also, it taps and adds a blue. Then we have the One Ring and Memory Jar, which is going to let us churn through our deck. Notably, we did not have any wheels, so we're not wanting to get other people's stuff too much. And also, we're prioritizing colorless stuff. Memory Jar itself is historic, so it makes sense. I mean, I could see that you would run like a Time Twister or a wheel or something in here, but, you know, they know better than I do. Enchantments, Remora, copy artifact, of course, and then Rhystic Study. 27 lands, relatively high land count for a deck that's not trying to draw any lands after they get the thing going. Usually, I expect. Buried Ruin lets you put an artifact into your hand. Great Furnace itself is an artifact. Inventor's Pharaoh tutors for them. Mishra's Workshop, highlighted this card a couple times. Taps for 3 for artifacts, which is really, really good. Being able to go very early, anything, any enabler, copy something, Semblance Anvil to make your artifacts 2 less off your first land. You could dump your hand, do that into like Signet, Helm, whatever. And then Manamo, Urza Saga, relatively normal mana base here. But yeah, Jhoira getting to do the thing. We see ways that you can go through your deck. You can, I guess just draw your deck and Thassa's Oracle if you want. If you can loop any artifacts, you can get infinite mana or just kill everybody with Glaring Flesh Raker. Presume like during the loop, like if you did a Ancestral Statue loop, you can tap it for blue through Urza, balance it. Like pretty cool stuff here. Then we got Raffine. We're grinding on it, Esper style. Let's see what we got. So Raffine, if you're not familiar, Esper, flying word 1. It's a 1/4, and it has whenever you attack, target attacking creature connives X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. And since this version doesn't give us reminder text, let's read the reminder text for connive. Draw X cards, then discard X cards. Put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each non-land card discarded this way. So we're going to get to churn through our deck. We get a bunch of little dinky attackers that get through, and then we're going to get value out of that. Put a bunch of counters, presumably on one attacker. Maybe get some good pressure, but also we're going to get to churn, get stuff into our graveyard that we want there. Take advantage of those kind of synergies. Good stuff. Esper cards, your Dranniths, your Abolishers, Bowmasters, Thoracle, Ranger Captain. We're on the Talion, which is definitely much less of a staple than it used to be. Labman doubling up on the Thoracle. Polywog Prodigy. Our commander does trigger it. It's a 1/4. You pass the Polywog test. If your commander doesn't trigger Polywog Prodigy, it's probably bad in your deck. Then we have more of our attacking focused, get a bunch of stuff in play plan. The Ocelot Pride, which is we're going to get the City's Blessing with all our attackers, and then maybe make tokens of extra stuff and go kind of wild. Thera Ascendant. Containment Priest, which is a bit of flex hate against the creature tutor decks, your Kinnans, things like that. Dothy Voidwalker. Gotta love the textless version. Just making my life so easy. But you know what Dothy does. Turn off graveyards. Pretty nice. Lavinia. This is a card I mentioned that is, looks like Grand Abolisher, but it's probably closer to Defense Grid, so you gotta be really careful when you deploy this thing. But it can be pretty backbreaking. It is, sort of like a Vexing Bauble effect, a little bit spookier, but when you have a good feel for it, especially right now, if you're not into a very turbo-heavy pod, which you're very often not gonna be, the potential for you to get punished by this thing probably isn't too much, but you do have to be aware of it. Malevolent Hermit is a nice thing to get into our graveyard. Sack it, counter something unless they pay 3, and then non-creature spells you control can't be countered. Ornithopter of Paradise is pretty cool, just getting to run a 2-mana flying dork. Aven Interrupter is a hard to disrupt piece of disruption. Delny doubles our Raffine as long as we don't put the counters on Raffine, so that's very sick. We got Tymna in the mix, Luris of the Dream Den getting some value, Enduring Curiosity because we are basically a attack wing out kind of deck to get value, so Enduring Curiosity and Rev make a ton of sense. And then Street Wraith, we might be Doomsdaying, which you do tend to see with Raffine because it's also pretty good at cracking a Doomsday pile. Sorceries, we do have Reanimate, Tutors, including Beseech the Mirror, and the Doomsday, which we expected. What the fuck is this? Urtai's Meddling. X in a blue. Wind. Okay, we're gonna have to get new text because I know this is already wrong. Target spell's controller exiles it with X delay counters on it. Beginning of each of that player's upkeeps, if the card is exiled, remove a delay counter from it. If the card has no delay counters on it, the player puts it onto the stack as a copy of the original spell. So is this just like a worse delay? They're not on delay. An X cannot be 0. There's no shenanigans with that. So for 1 in a blue, bare minimum, you exile a spell, and then their upkeep, they can cast it. What is this going to synergize with? Because we can use it on our own spell. But we have to get the spell in the stack, so it's not like we can cheat a spell into play. I'm really not sure what Urtai's Meddling is doing here. I don't see anything with X spells or exiling. I mean, it like synergizes with Aven Interrupter and Draenith, but so does Delay. It's kind of the same deal. So might have to come back to that one. We'll have to figure that out. Got the Mystical and Enlightened Tutor into the Flood Maw as a bounce spell. Stubborn Denial. Usually I think this is kind of cutesy. It's not like our commander, gets it online eventually, but not even the turn it comes down. But can do the thing. Sometimes just a Force Spike is good enough. Swan Song. We're on the Swords Vamp. We're on Cabal Ritual. We are going to get lots of cards into our graveyard. You don't usually see Cabal Ritual in mid-range Esper decks, but we're very likely to get the Threshold. So it's just when you do, it's going to be mostly a better Dark Ritual. Drown in the Lock. That's a really cool art I did not know existed. I'm not usually super high on this card, but it is really sick. Counterspell, mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. And then destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. I highlight that because there's not a synergy that we have that enables Drown in the Lock. We're just saying that Drown in the Lock is good enough. Now, this player did very well here, but you know that I'm here to highlight things that stand out to me. And what stands out to me is that graveyards are never cool or good or packed anymore. No one's churning through wheels. You kind of have to get to the late game for this to be good, and it's still a 2-pip. Like, it is flexible. That's the nice thing. It can kill something or it can counter something, which is very nice. It's a counter spell that if you don't have it in your hand when the Seedborn comes down, you can maybe still get rid of the Seedborn, except Seedborn decks don't usually have 5 cards in their graveyard. I'm not really sold on the Drown in the Lock. Maybe it's another one of those cards. Well, one, I don't play Dimir a lot lately. Maybe it's one of those cards that if I played with it more and I was paying attention to the numbers and how often it lined up, it would feel better. My initial thought in the games that I'm in, though, is it typically isn't great. Or at the very least, I know it wouldn't be that good against me because most of the creatures people want to kill of mine are like 4 or 5 mana, and I usually have like 2 cards in the graveyard unless I'm a Malevolent Rumble. Get Lost. Raven Charm is one I've been hearing talk about, and it just is pretty flexible. I think it fits pretty well in this style of deck, which is relatively reactive and is also playing a lot of creatures. It just kind of lines up. I do think Thraben Charm, if 2 mana interaction is something your deck is interested in, that is a card to think about if you're in white. And then we have the Fierce, both the Forces, MBT, and the Gush, because we're a Doomsday deck. We got to be gushing. Artifacts. Fast mana, we're on the LED, presumably doing stuff with the Doomsday that can be like part of lines and like Legacy Doomsday. We're on Curse Totem to help lock out some of these other creature-oriented decks. A lot of the green-based decks really don't like seeing Curse Totem. Crypt Color Chariot. This is a new one. 3 in a black for a vehicle. It's a 5/5. Menace. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, create that many tap 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, and it has crew too. So this is pretty cool because it basically lets us double our Raffine bare minimum every turn. Discard like 4, get 4 2/2s. The next turn, at the very least, I have 4 more bodies in play. So now I'm discarding 8. Then it just keeps piling up. So that's a pretty cool one. It is on the more expensive side. It is a pretty good body too as crew for 2 because it's very often you just get to crew with a zombie and you have a 5/5 Menace swinging. Pretty real on the beats plan and just generating lots of bodies to keep turning through the deck. Enchantments, here's some interesting stuff we got. We got Remora, the Ristic, and the Steel Enchantment, which are not too crazy. Counterbalance, which we see pop up every now and then. There was no top. There was a Sensei's Divining top. I forgot this. Dude, it's hard. There's so many arts, even though that is just the top. What else would that be? I got excited about the giant cat zombie thing. Then we got Telepathy, which is your opponents play with their hands revealed. Makes things a lot easier and is very often going to sway threat assessment away from you. It is a pretty interesting card. It's one that people often joke about playing, but I haven't seen too often. I don't think I've ever seen it in play. It's weird. And then Teferi's Aegis Insight, 2 blue. If you would draw a card except the first you can draw on each of your draw steps, you draw 2 instead. Connive will only have you discard the X. So you're going to actually be netting cards because you'll like draw 6 and then discard 3. And then 28 lands, basic swamp. We are in Undercity Sewers as a survey land, Vault of Champions, whole bunch of fetches. We're on the Phyrexian Tower, which we do have a lot of creatures lying around, so I mean, it kind of makes sense. I still don't understand Urtai's Meddling. If you or a loved one know why Urtai's Meddling is in here, let me know. I don't know why I just thought of like the medical commercials. If you or a loved one have had your spell exiled through Urtai's Meddling, you may be entitled to compensation. Then we're talking Yidris, baby. This is what I'm talking about. We're storming. We got a Japanese Yidris here. I'm always glad that people, even though I don't know if his list is all Japanese, don't make it Japanese on here. Okay, I lied. He did. It's just mixed. Why would you do this to me? I purposely, even though my Rockfast list is like 90% Japanese at this point, I keep it English on Moxfield for other people's sanity. So Yidris is the hipster Krark. It is a pretty sick storm build that is Sam's white. Let's try to figure it out. So what does Yidris do? we're gonna have to view details. Trample, 4 or 5/4. I thought it was a 4/4. 5/4 Trampler. When it deals combat damage to a player, as you cast spells from your hand this turn, they gain Cascade. Smack you with Yidris. Destroyed. Liberal. And then I cast whatever. Praetor's Grasp. I'm gonna Cascade until I hit something 2 or less. If I cast 1, I think is where it's really strong, because 1, like if I cast a Delighted Halfling, I could get Inevitable Betrayal because it gets around the suspend. This thing has a mana cost of there's nothing, so it's 0. So you get to cast it off of Cascade. That's kind of the broken Cascade thing. So I could get a Bribery, which is what Inevitable Betrayal is, where I search somebody's library for a creature, just put it into play. Wheel of Fate, which is a wheel. And then bare minimum, you're getting these rocks down here for your 0s. Yidris just kind of doubles up on your spells, which especially if they get you more things, like if you find a Profane Tutor or whatever, cast a regular tutor, oh, it got a Profane Tutor. I get a card off the tutor. I get a card off this tutor. I have 2 more cards. Those are both Cascade as well. Maybe into the Suspend card. And we're just going to get more and more stuff. Creatures relatively light. 4 dorks. Basically, our creatures are here to produce mana, because between those and the Spirit Guides, that's all they do. Ragavan a little bit extra, but 9 of our 12 creatures. And then we have Thassa's Oracle to win, Valley Floodcaller to flash, and then Dosin, which says players can only cast spells during their turn. So this is our like silence effect. Sorceries, we have those suspend cards I mentioned. We have a Bribery, a Demonic Tutor, and a Wheel of Fortune that we can cascade into, or potentially just suspend and cast a good old-fashioned way if they're in your opening hand. Gamble, get probe, sort of like what you would expect from Grixis Breach, but we also get like little bits of extra green cards like Culling Ritual. So like the J-Will, Praetor's Grasp, Beseech, you would expect these to be in like, you know, a Rogsai or something like that. And we also get the green mana dorks and a big spell like Culling Ritual, which is really impactful. So we've got Pact and Offer, Autumn's Veil, do my best to give you guys spells you could, this is the worst Veil of Summer. Brainstorm, Chain of Vapor, Crop Rot, Culling the Weak, we got the Dark Writ, Mental Misstep, Noxious, Born Upon a Wind. We've got the Manamorphose, Final Fortune, Born, and then the Crop Rot. That's kind of the package I mentioned that like 5 color decks often run, or these kind of like Thras Vial colors. If you have the Manamorphose and try to flash into the instep, any one of your payoffs works, because you can get Manamorphose for Final Fortune, Born Upon a Wind for the crop rotation into Emergent Zone, potentially even into the Dramatic Reversal. Again, sorry these are Japanese, but we just looked at this in another deck. You know what it does. So you got that. That's nice. We're showing the Snap, Swat, and Fierce. I wonder how good these are and how what percentage of the time they're online, because 4 pips for a commander to get these cards, you know, cEDH playable, pretty intense. They're probably quite good when it is online, because deflecting Swat, Cascade down into, you know, 2 or less. And then we're on the Nas and Force of Will. Artifacts, we've got not the craziest count. We're at 13. We got Fast Mana, LED, Wishclaw, bunch of talismans, and then we are on the One Ring. And then enchantments, we've got Carpet, Mystic Ristic Breach, and then both Necropotences, and Dom and Potence rather. 26 lands. Are we on the Emergent Zone? We are. So we do have that whole plan. Just a bunch of duels, not really any utility stuff, keeping it pretty clean. Ottawara and I think this is a first. This is, I think, the very first time I've covered a deck list that was green and did not have Beseiju. March 11th, 2025, no Beseiju in a green deck for the first time. He doesn't want it. It's not proactive. You can't use it on your stuff. Ottawara, I can bounce my own thing and net some mana. How often you'll do that, I don't know. I kind of feel like for the same reason, like we talked about the Najeela that was on Beseiju, not Ottawara. For this deck, it kind of feels like the same argument could be made that you would opt for Beseiju because as a land, it's better because a lot of your establishing plays are green. Almost none of them are blue. I mean, other than like turn 1 fish, how many of your early plays are going to be that? And that's usually where those cards don't have a lot of lands in your opener. That's usually when they're going to come up, because the later the game goes, the higher value those cards have, because we start getting into like, oh, people are going to make win attempts, or, you know, I need the utility of this card. Really cool looking list. If you want to play like a very dedicated Storm deck, this might be the way to go. It's in the best colors for it, I think. It gets to do a pretty unique plan. You get a really cool looking commander to do it in. I think it's pretty sick. Then we're looking at another TNK. What the heck? They're Magic Online? What is this? You had to go out of your way to do this. This is cursed. Very similar creatures to the last thing. We do have Opposition Agent. I should have mentioned this. I've been hearing players kind of be more iffy on Opposition Agent lately. Whether that's correct or not, I'm not sure. But like the TNK earlier didn't have one, and I barely or didn't notice. I don't think I mentioned it. But I did talk to players at the events and just in general, people who are kind of iffy for Oppo and rather just have like good value thing that plays into their game plan. Not sure how I feel about that. I don't play a lot of decks that run Opposition Agent. I know my deck is getting better into opposition agent, I feel like, so I'm caring less about it. And it might be a situation with like Dranith where it just kind of goes in and out of the meta depending on what people are doing. Still obviously a pretty strong card, but if it's not playing well for you, you don't have to run it. So something to keep in mind. Sorceries, we got the meme bet. That's another one. Meme bet and like wipes too are also things that like I don't expect every single deck to run meme bet now. They don't have to do it. It's just like not as often gassed if you're not feeling it yourself with like brain freeze. But tutors, wheel, meme bet. We have toxic deluge as a board wipe. Instance, we're on the dispel, flood maw, which has been pretty popular here. We are on path and swords. The rest of this looking pretty standard. 12 artifacts. Again, no, the one ring, we're on wish claw, bunch of rocks, you know, talismans and the fast mana with your LED. Enchantments, we do have the steel enchantment and the copy artifact here, which again are popping up in TNK. We're on the necro, so breach, tithe, necro, Ristic. 27 lands, we are on the Cavern of Souls here as well. Fire of Industry, relatively similar mana base that we got here. All right, I saw this deck, I played with it, I didn't see it do anything. I was right next to his top 16 game. I didn't see it do anything. So we're gonna learn together what this thing does. So Volo is our commander. 2 in a blue, 2/3. When he enters the battlefield, create Volo's Journal, a legendary colorless artifact token with hexproof. And whenever you cast a creature spell, note one of its creature types that hasn't been noted for this artifact. I cast Bird, Bard, note one of its types. For 2 and tap, I draw a card for each creature type noted for target permanent you control named Volo's Journal. So I get 2 or 3 types on it. I spend 2 and tap. I draw 2 or 3. Pretty simple. And then Agent of the Iron Throne is our background. Commander creatures you own have whenever an artifact or creature you control is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. We can use this as an outlet. We could just be using it for the colors. Let's see. We're in Dimir. We've got 25 creatures. Our types are, we got a bird bard, we got a wizard, a dofty rogue, a fairy, a rebel, drakes, otters, frogs, weirds, drones, Phyrexian Vidalkins, shapeshifters, horrors. So we got a lot of types, and a goblin. There are a lot of types to note on Volo. So we got that going for us. So Pheto Alchemist, we can use it to untap Volo. So clones, we got Flesh Dupe, no Fimage. We are on Gilded and Volatile Stormdrake. We're on Phyrexian Metamorph as a clone and Clever Impersonator. Fairy Mastermind, Kitsa and Rona, which are both dramatic reversal decks, so I guess Volo himself probably he also is. So we're going to be doing dramatic reversal, probably Scepter too. So we got the Scepter. There's a reversal. Okay, so we're a dramatic reversal deck. Starting to make sense. There are a lot of Dimir dramatic reversal commanders, but this one has like a bit more utility where you don't have to do that thing, I don't think, but it is an outlet you have. Now let's look at some of these cards that I don't know what they do. Unctus I've seen. This was another Nadu. We're like blue-black Nadu over here. So Mirren Spy is 2 in a blue. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may untap target creature. I think we saw this in like the Emery decks, stuff like that you would loop with. Okay, so we cast an artifact, we get to untap Volo to do the thing some more. Draw more cards. Got it. The rest of these are just big creatures that are pretty strong. Boggart Trawler is graveyard hate, but also it's just a land in our 2-color deck. That's fine. So for the most part, this is pretty normal. We have like dramatic scepter type enablers, things that are going to untap our commander to get us more value or help enable a combo there. It might be a little awkward to loop Hullbreaker Horror with it, but a lot of these Dimir decks also just play Hullbreaker Horror, so we'll see. Reanimate kind of makes sense. We got some big dudes. Tutors and then MDFCs. We're on Banishing Knack and Helix combo. We got Consult, Swan Song, Mana Drain, Limdul's Vault, Sink into Stupor. So a bunch of interaction, the reverse we talked about. Nothing really too wild in the instance. Pretty normal Dimir stuff here. There's nothing, I could look at this and not really know what I'm looking at. I might assume this is like Italian build or something like that, right? Artifacts, we have the Ring, Machine God's Effigy. That's a cool way that we could loop. We can loop that with Volo because we'll be able to copy the Volo. And then we get around Summoning Sickness by having an artifact version of it. So that makes sense. And it's also just, I think Machine God's is just a good card. You don't need a combo with it. I think it's just pretty strong. One Ring, Talisman, again, other good stuffy cards. Animate Dead. I'm a little surprised we didn't have like a way to get a creature into our yard because this doesn't discard, right? None of this stuff is getting a creature into our yard. So we're basically just value Animate Dead, reanimating, which we did see in the pre-ban meta, though that was kind of warped around Dockside. Mirror Maid is a copy. Ristic. Unstoppable Plan. First one of these I've seen, which is the beginning of your end step. Untap all non-land permanents you control. Gives you like a dramatic reversal each of your end steps, which is pretty nice with Volo. And then Inventive Iteration. 3 in a blue Saga. Return up to 1 target creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. That's very below rate. Turn an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand if you can't draw a card. And then exile this, return it. and it becomes flying. Whenever you cast a spell, your opponents can't cast spells with the same mana value as that spell until your next turn. That's pretty cool. That's going to take a minute to flip into. If you do that, it is going to be pretty strong. And it's until your next turn. That's really interesting. It might just, I mean, it is pretty slow. Like if this was on a 2-mana thing, that's probably pretty reasonable. And if the first trigger was at all worth it, 4-mana sorcery speed bounce a creature is really, really, really bad for this format. I mean, even the second mode is kind of abysmal. That will have some moments where, you know, it kind of saves you or whatever, but it's really the last mode is where all this is. So it's like 4 mana, take 2 turns, get the value. It is cool tech. But comparing that to like Malevolent Hermit or something, I feel like the Malevolent Hermit is going to feel a lot more useful in a lot more scenarios. 27 lands total, really valuing MDFCs. We got the Undercity Sewers, Takanuma, relatively free. Nothing else too wild in the mana base. So we have kind of a unique take on a Scepter Dimir deck that also just generates value on its own. I really tend to dislike things like Rona or other decks that are just like, it just, you know, combos with Scepter and that's it. I think that is way too low of a floor. I definitely think you want something closer to this if you are going low color Scepter style combo of just, you can just do stuff with this. This just draws me cards and I have Dimir stuff that I can do. I'm much more inclined to do that than I am to just run a guy that happens to combo with Dramatic Reversal. So I think it lines up pretty well and pretty interesting. It's a pretty unique one if you want to try something else out in Dimir. Then we got fan favorite Marneus Calgar of the Astartes. 2 white, blue, black, double strike, 3/5. Whenever you one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card, spend 6, make 2/2/2s with Vigilance, which draws you a card. Marneus does the Esper thing pretty well. He's kind of a Thrasios, kind of a Tivit. We got Teferi and Tezzeret, both just reasonable cards in Esper decks that pop up. We are on the Kitten as well to be able to go off with Teferi. 20 creatures, pretty high, but we have good stuffy cards, Mockingbird, Esper, Fairy, Gilded Drake, Lotho, Silence Effects, Metamorph, Bowmasters. We all know those. Let's talk about the other things. Ocelot Pride makes tokens. Make token, make card, Marneus. Card, make token. Charismatic Conqueror makes tokens very quickly, actually. Orcish Bowmasters. Now, I watched a stream where people were doing this wrong. So, Orcish Bowmasters does make a token, but if you have it ping itself, it won't kill itself. It will ping and amass, and there will be no check to see if it dies in between that. The whole ability happens. You watch like Boschtermol do this on YouTube. Whenever someone like Veils or has One Ring Protection, there's no targets. You just ping the army, so nothing happens. You don't get to just ping and keep drawing cards off of Marneus. That didn't happen in this, but I saw it on like other stream, and I just figured that might be a common rules misconception. Or maybe Magic Online is wrong and I'm dumb too. Luris buys you back. You have like lots of cheap permanents that we're going to want. Just off of here, there's good stuff to get back. Gilded Drakes, Lothos, things like that. Luris is just pretty good value. Stridehanger Automaton. If an artifact token would enter the battlefield under your control, those tokens plus an additional 1/1 enter the battlefield instead. I don't think this is gonna stack because if it's one or more with Marneus and this replacement doesn't do, or one enters then another, I think they enter at the same time, but it is gonna jam up your token production very quickly. Warren Soul Trader is very good. That's where you can get broken with like things like Bowmasters, where Bowmasters trigger on the stack, sack it, make a treasure, Marneus draw a card, make a Mass Orcs 1, draw a card. That's where it gets bonkers. Warren Soul Trader is very powerful here. Educating is nuts. Grim Hireling makes his treasures and can help control the board. I feel like a lot of people forget about that Hireling mode, especially players who kind of slot it into a deck, test it for a little bit, maybe cut it. Rev also lines up pretty well with this. Those are also separate triggers for Rev. Same thing with Grim Hireling. So they're going to stack separately, which is a pretty big deal for Marneus because it's one or more. So Rev, hit 3 players, get 3 triggers, draw, treasures, get your thing, Ragavan, got the anime waifu thighs, everything's going great. Tivit is also important with that. Tivit is just pretty good. You're just an Esper derpy deck anyways, so you kind of just want a big old dude to just slam down and try to win you the game. Investigate are separate triggers other than the treasures. Investigate is its own trigger, so each clue that they give you is also a card draw for free. Hullbreaker Horror wins because we can pump infinite mana into Marneus and draw our deck. Sorceries, we got the Reanimate, Imp Seal, DT, we're on Transmute Artifact. We'll see what we're getting with that. Savine's Wreck, and then both the blue wheels as well as Deluge. That's pretty interesting. Instance, Pact, we're on Fatal Push, Sword, Silence, we're on the Mana Drain. Kind of lines up with like an Esper control mid-range style deck. Psych Rift, Rolic, and BT. So lots of interaction. We're not on Nas, of course. I don't even check for Nas barely anymore. Artifacts, 13 of them. We do have the Time Sieve, so Transmute can go get the LED, which is for something, presumably. Where's? I don't know. We'll figure it out. Or you can do Tivit Time Sieve, or just take extra turns anyways, because we're going to be making artifacts. We just have lots of ways to net tokens anyway, so we can just manually Time Sieve, which is going to be pretty good. And then Wishclaw or One Ring. Remora, Ristic, Smothering Tithe, which is like the card of this deck that a lot of people will point to because you make a treasure, and when you do that, you draw a card. Touch the Spirit Realm, pretty good removal. And then Amphibian Downpour. 2 in a blue, flash, storm, enchant creature. Enchanting creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog. Storm, those are individual triggers. What happens when we cast a permanent spell with Storm? We make tokens. What triggers this guy? Token, draw card, make frog. So yeah, Amphibian Downpour is gonna nuke the board and draw you a bunch of cards. It's kind of insane. Lands, 28 of them. We're on the Cavern of Souls. We're on City of Traders. Morphic Pool. Nothing else really standing out. Meticulous Archive is a Surveil and Undercity Sewers, so doubling up on Surveillance. So he updated it 3 hours ago. What did he change? He just added Lion's Eye Diamond, and then removed it, and then added it. So it looks like there's some considerations for an Intuition pile of like LED something, Savine's Wreck, maybe trying to set up the Tivit thing. I don't know. So the LED probably, it seems like it wasn't actually there at the tournament. Again, I try to do these as quick as I can, but one of the lists wasn't available yesterday, so I didn't record. I'm doing my best, guys. Golden roads that lead to nowhere. We got our TNT for the top 16. Every mana dork you could shake a stick at, including Devoted Druid. But yeah, that's a ton of them. That's basically all of them. Mockingbird, Archivist of Ogma, opting for that over like Fairy Mastermind, it seems. Grand Abolisher, Ranger Captain, and Cutzel as silence effects. Kinnan and the Lotho here. We got on the Bambi. Haze's Brewmaster to combo with that Devoted Druid. High Fate Trickster as a flash enabler. And we got the Seedborn Muse. Everything's looking pretty up to code here for TNT. This is one of those TNTs that says, hey, I hate it when I have Bowmasters and someone clones it, so they just don't run the Bowmasters. We got Tutors and Culling Ritual. Instance, we got Pact, Offer, Crop Rot, we're on the Dispel, Into the Flood Maw, lots of interaction. Swords, Abrupt Decay even, Limdul's Vault, Misdirection, the Force of Will at Home, Worldly Tutor, Horde, no Eladamri's Call. I don't know how popular that is in TNT right now. We are on the Basalt Monolith, Fast Mana, Signet, and then we are on Birthing Pod and Wishclaw. No, the One Ring. Enchantments, we got 6. Carpet, Mystic, Swift Recon for that Devoted Druid. Another Touch the Spirit Realm, and then Tithe and Ristic. Lands, we're on E-Zone as well as Cradle. No Talon Gates, no Surveil lands, so relatively clean mana base. So yeah, just a pretty focused on the Dork Thrasios kind of plan. Not like super enabling Tymna with making token attackers and flying stuff and Delnying and stuff like that. Just kind of leaning into the TNT Simic plus kind of plan. All right, next up we're taking a look at Rogsai. Pretty standard creature base, notably no Bowmasters. This has kind of been a back and forth thing really for like almost a year at this point of whether you want it, whether you're just winning, you know, if it fits the game plan, even though you run a bunch of wheels. It's one of those cards that like isn't really gas and you want something to help keep you going, so it can make sense to cut it for like a tutor or something. But we do have the Burgi, the Floodcaller, the Oracle Ragavan, and Spirit Guide, the other like main 5 creatures you tend to see. Sorceries, we only have 1 of the extra turn sorceries. Last chance here, no Warrior's Oath. We got the Plunge, Get Probe is here, Grasp, Grim Tutor. We do have an extra wheel, maybe kind of in that slot. We got all 4 of the wheels here. Was pretty common to see them go down to 3 wheels. Instance, pretty normal. We do have the Swan Song, Double Red Blast. Daze is here. Snap still on the list. Final Fortune, of course. Deadly Relic is here. Pretty normal. Just a couple of the flex slots. Things like Swan Song have come out. One of the Red Blasts. We've seen Relics get dropped. Artifacts for an 18. We are in the Vexing Bauble. That's a pretty notable one. That's one I've been kind of high on in testing when I do get around to playing Rogsai. I don't play it a ton now, but I do think there's some value to it. I know it stops your, free stuff from going off, but a lot of times you can do it. Set it up after you dump your fast mana and then do like a Nas behind it. Crack it afterwards. It can be awkward in certain positions, but sometimes it is like just a Veil of Summer basically that you can set down. And then we do have the One Ring coming a bit more popular in these decks after the bans. 2 Talismans and Signet. Enchantments, we are on the Necrodominance, and then the rest of this we expect. Necropotence, Mystic Ristic. We're on the 24 lands. We have Undercity Sewers as a Surveil land, and we do have Talon Gates. This is another thing that I've seen in some lists. Like I mentioned this, I think at the Boil 2, there was a list with this. We saw like 25, 26 lands. Talon Gate's just pretty good. It's basically a removal spell that also taps for mana. And we mostly just run soft removal anyways. You're not typically going to hold this up to deploy, but sometimes you might get to the spot where that does happen. Mostly pretty standard stuff here. Rogsai has seen definitely a bit of a dip post-ban right now. Looking like it's not the best spot. But we do have it here getting top 16 in this pretty large cEDH event. We got Thrasios Livio. Livio is 1 and a white. For 1 and a white, you can choose another target creature. its controller may exile it with an Aegis counter on it. And then you can spend 2 and a white, tap, return all exiled cards with Aegis counters on them to the battlefield under their owner's control. So off the top of my head, you can exile a card that makes mana and a card that untaps, and then bring them back, and then you go infinite, and you pump it into Thrasios. Seems like the first step, or one of the things we could do. Thrasios, of course, we all know what he does. Teferi is here. Are we on the kitten? We are. I see things that untap and or make mana, so the plan is coming together. We got Dorks, Bird, Esper, Archivist showing back up, Cloud of Fairies, because we're probably going to be like, this is probably going to be kind of Rog Thras adjacent in its strategy. Cradle, untap, shenanigans. Cloud of Fairies is another thing that ETB makes us mana. Destiny Spinner, Devoted Druid, Sanctum Weaver. We can do some untap shenanigans with to go infinite. We're on the Fairy Mastermind, Bambi, Derevi, Plagon in here. Plagon, I really wish I could run in Rog Thras. I actually think it would just be so good. Gaming Fence, white and a blue. ETB, you choose a non-land permanent, activate abilities of it can't be activated, and then this gets those abilities. Really kind of gets pointed out as it being especially good with like the One Ring, because they get stuck with it. You don't get the downside of losing life. You just tap and keep on drawing cards. Ewit, Endurance, Spellseeker, Bellringer, which is like the untapper that we mentioned. Emil, we can go infinite with that. Derevi. So we're kind of doing a Bant, Derevi, Emil type of plan, and then Livio enables some of that with, and you can have Thrasios pump it into. Sowing Micah's Bomb are going to be pretty cradle heavy. Technically 5 tutors. 4 of them searching our deck and 1 our opponent's. Wargate, something Bant gets access to for green, white, blue. You get to search for a permanent card with mana value X or less, put it into play. So just for 0, you can go get your Cradle or any other land. Any more than that, you know, you can grab a Dork, feels pretty bad. Get your Kinnan, whatever, depending on how much mana you have. And then Bribery, search an opponent's library, just stick something into play. Instance, we're on the Angel's Grace. Stapley stuff. Quick Reflexes pops up in these kind of decks. It's an untapper, works pretty well with our stuff. Silent Sword, Snap, we're a big Cradle deck. No Force of Negation. Mask of the Mimic is 1 mana, sack a creature, search your library for any copy of target creature card and put it into play, shuffle your library afterwards. Somebody else has something we want, we get it. People always mention that card with Dockside. Problem is Dockside usually killed you, but other people have a Kinnan. We could get a Kinnan. Maybe they have a Derevi. These Espers and stuff don't seem that great. Cloud of Fairies is relatively niche. I don't know how much of this stuff it's gonna work with. It might be good enough, but I feel like things aren't warped around one broken creature enough. Like if I did that, if Cloud of Fairies became the most popular card in the format, I would run it, maybe, because I would just, Cloud of Fairies need to be on the stack, go get my own Cloud Fairies. Is the format in a place where that is reasonably going to get to do the thing? No, but maybe it could be a good metagame option when you know you and other players are all prioritizing the same cards. So that is something to think about. Artifacts. Chrome Mox, Petal, Mamber. So fast mana, we're on the Basalt Monolith, Relic, Machine God's Effigy for our Devoted Druid, and then we're on the One Ring. Chemet, Swift Recon for Devoted Druid, something we get access to. We are an Earthcraft deck, which is cool. We don't get to see a lot of those. Training Grounds to enable our Thrasios and our Livio. Also, we get to make Livio only cost white for both of the activations, which is, I'm sure, relevant for some combo application. Wild Growth, Aura Shards, which is pretty cool. 1 green, white, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Can really disrupt other players' engines. 25 lands, relatively low. Basic of each of our colors. We're on the Talon Gates E-Zone, Crop Rot, Manamo. No Deserted Temple, so not like the most... And there weren't like a crazy amount of land tutors in the deck, so we're not like the most Cradle.deck kind of thing. We have different overlapping cards we can use to enable the Livio thing, whether it's Training Grounds or Cloud of Fairies, different untappers. So there's lots of different overlap that also gets us good value in general, which is, you know, kind of similar to Rog Thras. So this is a deck I was actually kind of aware of people brewing a Livio Thras deck. So it wasn't as crazy surprising to me, but it is really cool in the Bant space to be able to do this kind of thing. So interesting to see how this deck will develop. Then the last deck before we take a look at the top 4, we got TNK. Another Teferi. So Teferi pretty popular at this tournament. Esper, Ragavan, we're on the Saracen it for beats. Fairy Mastermind, Bowmasters, Facebreaker. Again, fairly normal stuff. No opposition agent. This is one of the players I talked to, and they kind of cut it. Sorceries, tutors, we are another reanimate. So we're starting to see this become more of a thing. I wonder if part of this is like Hashiton's popularity, which we didn't see Hashiton do especially well at this tournament. There were like 5 of them there, but there weren't any conversions. But I mean, maybe just in general, we're back to value reanimate. Wheel, no meme bet again. Graveyards are not getting packed right now. No Culling the Weak, both Red Blast. Starting to be something I have to point out, I feel like. But also there's just not as many red decks, so maybe that's part of it. Final Fortune, we're on Dispel, Offer, and Floodmaw. Path and the Swords. Pretty similar to what we've seen from some other decks. Artifacts is a little bit different. We've got Fast Mana, the LED, your Talismans, and Wishclaw, and then Imposter Mech. Really hard to kill an Imposter Mech version of a creature. 5 enchantments. We've got Steel Enchantment, instead of the Necropotence, but then we've got Mystic, Rhystic, Breach, and Smothering Tithe. 27 lands. We're on the Cavern of Souls again, so that's pretty popular here. And Spire of Industry, both very popular at this event. No Surveil land. So again, relatively standard TNK. We're starting to see some different card selections, like Oppo is not as much of a staple. We saw Saracen in this one. Fairy Mastermind starting to become more popular. No Delny here. So there are different options. There's like 5 to 10-ish slots you could definitely swap around based on what you're trying to do. Here's TNK doing the thing. Now we're going to take a look at our top 4, starting with Magda, featuring Kraum. I've heard pretty good things about Kraum in Magda, shutting down other people while letting us do the thing. Creatures, we got a whole bunch of dwarves. Ragavan making us treasures, Automaton as a artifact dwarf. We're on the Goblin Engineer, no Goblin Welder here. I think in general, Engineer's a little better because we don't need to just cheat a big thing into play. We care more about Engineer just finding something, and then we're going to have artifacts lying around in general anyways to be able to make the swap. So your kind of selection of artifact dwarves, Blind Pretender, Roaming Throne, Gimli making us more treasures, Magus of the Moon shutting down these greedy mana bases, Zorn doubling up on our treasures, Facebreaker, Pinnacle Monk, pretty similar to the list that I've been playing. I've been playing a good bit of Magda. Not so much lately. I've been testing Rock Thras and how much it's changed, but pretty good stuff. We've got our Barkform Harvester as an outlet to be able to do our Twin Shot Sniper loop, where we get to like triple up its triggers and then loop something. And Barkform Harvester also just letting us loop kind of whatever once we go infinite. Sorcery is just the J-Will and Sundering Eruption, which can blow up a land. Don't think you often want to cast this, but that actually is pretty decent utility on an MDFC right now to just be able to say like Cradle deck, go get a basic land. And creatures without flying can't block. So I have to do this to blow up the cradle. And then, also, my creatures can't be blocked. Oh, what do you know? Instance, relatively lean, I feel like, compared to some lists. So we got the Blast, Bolt, Volley. So a bunch of removal. Great Train Heist, which you can use to untap your dudes, get an extra combat. And whenever you deal damage, you make a tap treasure. That's like kind of the super mode that like triples your treasure production for a turn. Return the Favor. These kind of effects pretty popular in Magda right now. Bottle Cap Blast, which is just crazy. Braid is removal. So nothing too wild here. Artifacts. We do have Chalice of the Void. That and Vexing Bauble I know have been a little bit of a discussion for Magda players of which effect they prefer. Bauble shuts down kind of more things, but if you don't want to turn off like Force of Wills and Fierce Guardianships, you want them active at the table. Chalice of the Void can be nice because you're not shutting off potential interaction from the table. There's just like different ups and downs for both of these. Fast Mana Clown Carve is a free vehicle, pretty good. Damping Sphere is another stacks piece. More vehicles like the Flywheel Racer, Smuggler's Copter. So pretty stacksy with Sphere, both the Sphere effects, Sphere of Resistance, and Thorn of Amethyst. Lifecraft Engine, which is one of the newer vehicles that we got out of the deck that changed the list. All of your vehicle creatures will be dwarves. Your other dwarves will get +1/+1. So this will be an artifact dwarf and will turn your other vehicles into artifact dwarves, which is really big. We're on the Sculpting Steel, Tangle Wire, which is a really great stacks piece here, Trinisphere as well. We are on the Uba Mask, which is a little scary because if someone plays a Drannith, then the rest of the table is locked out. But Drannith Magistrate is not very popular right now. Uba Mask is a really nice thing to be able to deploy when draw engines are getting out of hand. It really changes the context of a mid-range game when people just can't accumulate cards. It's kind of use it or lose it. Then we got our Ring, Sky Sovereign, big old removal spell on a stick, basically. Godfair Statue is a hate piece. Portal to Phyrexia is one of the more impactful things you can tutor. And then Mycosynth Lattice, which we can do the Karn Lock with. Enchantments, we just have this really cool looking Blood Moon. A lot of like every Blood Moon printing looks cool. 32 lands total. The Arena of Glory to give some dwarves haste. Great Furnace. Mishra's Workshop, I've liked quite a lot in Magda. Treasure Vault, Talon Gates, again, really big fan of. Just interaction you can hold up around. You know, I've talked about Talon Gates probably more than any cEDH content creator. I love this card. Mutavault and Venture Sphere. So yeah, so we got Magda, pretty stacksy leaning, but the deck is just really fast now. There's just so many artifact dwarves and so many ways to get different things. Magda, a list that has only gotten better and just got a pretty big upgrade out of Ether Drift and is still just a menace to, you got to watch out for this thing. This thing is crazy. Next up, we're looking at Sisay, and we can see immediately this is a Planeswalker build of Sisay. It's starting to become a little bit more popular to prioritize just creature like Bloom Tender style combos and not run the full Nicol Bolas Oath of Teferi thing. There are builds that are basically only running Teferi and Tyvar as Planeswalkers, but here we see the full thing. We got a whole bunch of mana dorks. Bloom Tender, Kinnan, like staples of the deck. Asika, Enduring Vitality, Eora, Fabro, Elder, Emil, Takashima, Urtai, Kutzel, Silvala, basically all staples. Basim, which is blue-black. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. Can't be blocked this turn. Ability triggers only once each turn. Just come on damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is a blue-black legend that just pops up every now and then into the Sisay lists. A new one we got is Redshift Rocketeer Chief. Red-green Goblin Pilot for 2/3 Vigilance. Tap, add X mana of any one color where X is Redshift's power. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. And then 10 red-green. Put any number of permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield, which has exhaust, which means you can only do it once per game. So if you activate that, you'll probably win. 12 mana is a lot. We might be able to do it, but I mean, that is a lot of mana. On his face, he's a red-green legend. We've seen them run things like, whatever, the haste red-green dork. On screen now, I can't remember her name. I don't remember everything anymore. I'm too old. But this is a Vigilance Dork that taps for 2, and if we buff it, it's going to tap for more. It is mana of only one color. Like, you could have done any combination. We could only use it on abilities. I mean, come on now. Might still be pretty good. We're on Chainer here, which is a nice haste enabler, and you can cast creatures from your graveyard. And then the Gigantha, which is like, it's definitely more popular as a card in the deck now than a companion. The companion version of it, there's just too many things you lose out on now. But Gigantha, just as a dork that taps and pay 5 mana to activate Sisay, can be pretty insane. Sorcery's just got the 2 tutors. Instance, we are on Force of Will, Pact of Negation, MBT, we're on Fluster. We've got a Braid as a removal spell, along with Swords and Abrupt Decay. Quick Reflexes, Swat, Fierce, Psych Rift, pretty lean. 10 artifacts. Orrery, One Ring, Relic, Signet, Cauldron, fast mana. We are on the Cultist, Oath, Mystic Ristic, Touch, Smothering Tithe. This is pretty much staple status for Sisay builds. 29 lands, Beseiju, Mount Doom. We got to start doing Beseiju and Otawara checks because people are starting to just not run them. Like, I don't think there's an Otawara here. There isn't. So no Otawara. Beseiju, Cradle, everything else the same. But yeah, that is something I definitely have to be on the lookout for now, is more decks cutting Beseiju or Otawara. So Sisay, got a couple new legends you can test out. Most of these cards that I've at least seen in some lists, not all of them are staples. And again, keep in mind that you might start seeing Sisay builds that are not doing Planeswalker combos. Here's the one I had to go out of my way to get. We had some tech issues, I think, getting the deck list submitted. So maybe it's on EDH Top 16. If not, it's here. It'll be in the description. This is Sam Black's Rogthras, which we have covered a decent amount of times at this point. I've talked about Rogthras obviously a lot. We might be gushing a little bit here, folks. Rogthras has been an interesting point. I was working on a Rogthras video. Some Breach builds did well, like Pigeons, and some other people were just talking about Breach builds and stuff like that. Which is something we had seen, but we were seeing some new cards come in, like sudden substitution, stuff like that, and people experimenting with more. I had already talked about and, played with like more token-focused strategies that Sam had run, like Chatterstorm and Third Path, and then I had added Skull Clamp into my list, and I think that's been kind of adopted around. But we got some new stuff. We got some new tech. Some of it other people knew about, some of it Sam threw in here. Play testing with some of this stuff. I immediately felt that my video needed to be redone, and there will need to be a new Rogthras video because there are some crazy impactful things in here. And my list is just going to change. I ran Breach this past weekend. I will not be running Breach going forward. At least I'm not planning to unless something changes, because the quality just dipped, and I felt that in my play testing. I felt that the dip in my opening hands was relevant to me. I felt almost a whole card worse, but we're not doing too much of a comparison here. But we are going to highlight, I've talked a ton about Rogthras. I'll still highlight what the deck does, but I really want to focus on some of the newer stuff that we've got. This is a very Cradle-focused version of the list, which a lot of them are, but this is basically leaning into that as the focus over Breach or Otter things, whatever other thing you might prioritize. This is very much focusing on breaking Gaia's Cradle, and that is more or less the only thing we're really trying to do. Staples of the deck: Birds, Halfling, Cloud of Fairies to untap our Cradle. Lots of clones. Kinnan is not here with Basalt Monolith. Most of us have moved away from Basalt and Cloudstone and artifact-focused win cons and are just using it as a way to generate lots of mana with things like Enduring Vitality or Cryptolith Rites. Cryptolith Rite, I think it's singular, not plural. Lots of clones. Sam told me he brought in Gilded Drake kind of as tech against Marneus, but that Gilded Drake had just been good even not playing against it. Eternal Witness is here for loops and just general value. Spellseeker, one of the most powerful pieces of like utility in the deck. Trinket Mage goes in. We have a pretty good package for Trinket Mage to go and find stuff now that overlaps really well with the Cradle plans and other things we might be doing. Value Flood Caller generically pretty good. Kitten, Stunning Micah Spawn gets Cradle, Cradle number 2, Cradle number 3, and then utility lands after that. Seaborn Muse wins us the game. Newer things you might not be aware of are cards like Springheart Nantuko, which already had kind of gotten a bit of hype in Rogthras like the past week or so. It's just really strong. For 1 and a green, you get a 1/1 with landfall, make a insect token. But if you bestow it on a creature, so you spend still just 1 and a green, you put it onto a creature, and that creature gets +1/+1. And then when a land enters, you can pay 1 and a green and make a copy of that creature instead of the insect. But either way, you make the insect. If you don't do anything else, you still get the bug. But if I put Springheart Nantuko on, say, a Thundertrap trainer, every time a land enters, I can spend 1 in a green and I get a new Thundertrap trainer and I get that ETB. That's pretty good. Just generic good value. Put it on an EWIT, put it on anything with decent value. It's already pretty strong. Put that on a Cloud of Fairies. Spend 1 in a green, Cloud of Fairies ETB, make a whole bunch of mana. That's pretty good. You can kind of see how it can start to get out of hand, but it doesn't need to, which is the really good thing I think about it. Where in my playtesting, these token enablers, they're all about 2 mana. And they really only need to make about 3 bodies to feel pretty strong because we're so focused on both the rights effects with Vitality, but also mainly Gaia's Cradle. 2 mana to make 3 mana is usually the that turn kind of floor-ish. And then the longer it goes or the more Cradle untaps you get, the more you're netting mana. And it starts to get really out of hand. New things to the list. Magus of the Candelabra is a card that some players had talked about in the deck. And I think for a little bit pre-ban, it just looked slow to me. Talking to Sam, he just straight up didn't know this was a card and said, of course he would have ran it if he knew about it. And I think especially now post-ban that we're not doing like Dockside and we're not, getting turn 2'd as much. This setup is just so reasonable, and it being on a 1/2 body is so nice. It's hard to Bowmasters. Candelabra is one of the most powerful cards in our deck. This is an extra one. It's green. You can get it with Green Sun Zenith. Seems pretty nice. Druid of Purification is 3 in a green. When it enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player may choose an artifact or enchantment you don't control. Destroy each permanent controlled this way. Chosen this way, rather. Speaking with Sam about it, this is just a card that has like popped into decks. It's more of a casual looking card. His kind of philosophy on it was that the only way the Rogthras engine isn't the best thing that's happening if you're set up at all is people having Ristics, Mystics, Smothering Tides, etc. that are just doing more than you, because typically when we're set up, we just do that level of thing at the same level as them or better, just with our creatures, Cradle and Thrasios. If no one else is doing that kind of thing, no one's really beating us. And so this can really just say like, hey, this enters, get rid of all this junk. We're resetting the game. I'm probably favored in that scenario. So it looks pretty good. I'm curious to test that one. And then the big one for me, this is tech that people had started talking about at least this week, but I hadn't heard about it. But I heard some discussion about it at the event. People talking about they had mentioned it or maybe mentioned it to Sam. And that's a Boro Breezecaller, which is 1 in a blue for a flying 1/1 Moonfolk Wizard. And you can spend 2 mana, return a land you control to its owner's hand, untap target land. I saw this card, heard some talk about it, and I was like, okay, that seems pretty good. And then I kept just stumbling into wins with it. And I was like, oh, this isn't just pretty good. I'm pretty sure this is like Cloud of Fairies, Dockside, Nadu level busted in this deck. I haven't played a lot with it, but my first assessment of just messing with it and just seeing what it does in normal scenarios and the way it overlaps with what we're doing is it seems like one of the most powerful cards in the deck. And I think it's going to just completely change how this deck plays because this thing is insane. For some context, we're pretty Cradle focused, and we also very frequently have 2 creatures just off the bat, kind of turn 1, maybe turn 2 into play off of our command zone. So our Cradle count is kind of unnaturally high normally than everybody else. The interesting kind of reasonable floor or mid-level, depending on how you want to evaluate it with a Boro, is you have a Gaia's Cradle that taps for 6. In that scenario, a Boro means that every Thrasios activation that hits a land was free, because you tap Cradle for 6 mana, activate Thrasios, put a land into play. You have 2 mana left up. Spend that 2 mana, return that land you just got, untap Cradle, activate Cradle, 6 mana, you do it again. Those are free now. If you hit a land, it's just a reset. If you have a Cradle count of above 6, which the way that we're constructed is reasonable. I know this sounds like pie in the sky. In this deck, I promise you it's not. If your Cradle count is above 6, then every Thrasios activation that hits a land is now mana positive. So at 7, you net a mana off of Thrasios activation. The bigger it gets, the more mana you start netting. And it gets to a point where there's this non-deterministic, almost Nadu kind of thing of tap, make mana, activate, get another land, tap, make mana, netting mana as you go, just chaining to get things. And then you can see the overlap with like, if that's in play with Springheart Nantuko, if you're hitting lands, you increase the Cradle count every single land. And then you get another guy, and then another guy, and then another guy. And then it's just netting more mana as it goes. So that can just be super powerful, like mana positive Thrasios activations. It's just a crazy thing that we haven't got to do. It also just has a combo with cards in the deck already that are good. It, in a Gaia's Cradle that tap for 5, and my favorite card, as you know, Talon Gates of Madara, mean that we can tap our Cradle for 5 mana, spend 4 of it and put Talon Gates of Madara into play. Then we tap Talon Gates, we go up to 2 mana, we phase out a creature when it enters, we spin the 2 mana and return Talon Gates and to untap our Cradle. We're back where we started. So for 5 creatures in play with Cradle, Talon Gates of Madara is infinite phasing out of creatures in play. You just phase out the board. And infinite landfall triggers. Again, if Springheart Nantu goes in play, we get to go infinite and do the thing. Because that's the other part is, once we're tapping Cradle for 6, we phase out the board, we net a mana, we go infinite at instant speed with lands. Activated abilities and lands. No casting of spells required. Just boop, 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 lands into play, go infinite. It's really good. If you're not familiar with this deck, it might seem a little weird, but we just break Cradle so hard already, and this just does it even better. I'm so excited for this card. And that power at instant speed, not casting spells, is really ridiculous. This is a major thing to watch out for. This is going to change the way we play this deck. Other staples in our sorceries. Green Sun Zenith has become quite good. We're basically a Simic deck at this point. And then Finale of Devastation has been a staple the entire time this deck's existed. It's a tutor, it's a win con. Malevolent Rumble is just pretty good. It gets you a body for 1 and a green. It basically only costs green, and then we run tons of permanents, so the card selection that you get access to is just very high. Helps fuel Delirium for things like Shifting Woodland, and now cards like Traverse the Uvenwald, which is a green, search for a basic, but if you have Delirium, you can search for a land or any creature, and then also fuels Analyze the Pollen, which is pretty similar. A green searches for a basic, or if you collect Evidence 8, which is exile 8 mana worth of things in your graveyard, then you can search for a creature or land, put it in your hand. So close to like a DT effect if you get these things fueled. New staple of the deck has been Chatterstorm. This card is busted. Storm, Chatterstorm, 3 squirrels like I mentioned. It feels good. Anything above that, I've cast this thing for 16. I flashed it in off of Floodcaller for 16. Flashed in Candle, untap Cradle, tap for 16. Actually, no, it didn't tap for 16, tap for 26. That had other creatures. And I just made more. This thing is nuts. Chatterstorm is very, very strong. And it's another one of those reasons that this Oboro, like, oh, I don't know, Cradle for 6, that sounds like a lot. Yeah, and you're goober deck that actually like casts other things other than creatures. We make squirrels out here. Don't even get me started on Earthcraft. Once we get down to there, that's a whole different deal. And then Sam is also on Sylvan Scrying, which is just 1 and a green, search for a land. One issue with these effects before, the way that we were constructed, was essentially at some points it was like Cradle and then maybe Manamo, and then after that the fall off was pretty hard for lands we want to get. I'm going to go ahead and go down to the lands because it's pretty important. But now it's basically become standard that we run Cradle and it's the most important card on our deck. We run Manamo and it's one of the better enablers for Cradle. Talon Gates I've mentioned some of the utility on, and like when MH3 came out, it reevaluated lands too because we got Talon Gates and Shifting Woodland. And then we started running Deserted Temple, which we should have been running the entire time. And the overlap means that there are now basically 3 Cradles in our deck, plus the Growing Rights of Itlimoc that can give you a 4th. And that means that it's very, very rare that an effect that finds a land is not powerful. If Sowing Microspawn is a dead card because you already have all 3 of the Cradles or whatever and all the utility lands in play, you're winning the game anyways. That means I'm tapping Cradle, I'm untapping Cradle, I'm tapping Cradle, I'm untapping Cradle, I'm tapping Cradle. I get 3 Cradle taps. If I have a Candle effect in, those start scaling, and that's just how we win games. So like if these cards are bad, there's not many scenarios where they don't do anything and you aren't in an amazing position anyways. Instance, we run red spells, but they're free. It seems like the value of adding red to your deck isn't really worth contorting your mana base to even a slight degree, because red, there's just not cards in red that seem worth casting right now for our deck. So we've got SWAT, Flare, Fierce, other Flare, free spells that are enabled by our commanders. Some of the most broken stuff you can do in this format is enabled by Rogue Rack, and these do it the best. We've got Force of Will, no Force of Negation. We're pretty proactively leaning. That's why you also don't see things like Swan Song or the Red Blast. We're not trying to sit around and counter spells. We really need to set up in the early game, and we don't want to be throwing away resources to stay alive. We really got to focus on just interacting to the bare minimum that we can, ideally using it to protect our own stuff. We're not like a pure parasitic deck. We definitely have interaction. Like I mentioned, we have a much higher than average use case of these 4 spells on the top. So while like Tymna Kraum might run more counter spells than us, these 4 up here are basically always online as free counter spells. So we are less likely to die with a counter spell in hand. Basically is the idea. Crop Rot goes and gets one of those busted lands. Chain of Vapor is just very, very powerful. I guess another card I didn't mention, Ottery stuff. Dourport Mage is when another creature leaves the battlefield without dying that you control. You draw a card, you can spend 1 in a blue and return a creature. That can be mana neutral or mana positive if you have like Earthcraft shenanigans going on. or depending on your build with like Training Grounds or Biomancer's Familiar. This thing's just pretty good. It makes your Kitten flickering of creatures also draw you a card. And if you like Chain of Vapor your own creatures or snap them, anything like that, any of those effects, which we do a lot of, also start netting you cards, and it lets you do mana neutral loops to be able to draw your deck without Thrasios needing to be in play. Gut Shot, Sam was pretty set on saying that this is just straight up better than Lightning Bolt. Not having to hold up actual mana, especially red mana, to be able to remove something is nice. We have to run something like this as an outlet for like an Eternal Witness loop at the end if we go infinite beyond, like that lets us do it instant speed. Like Finale of Devastation, we can't instant speed it. Gut Shot has just been pretty good, and it being free is really nice. The main thing we want to kill that isn't like a game-winning threat is Orcish Bowmasters, and this does it perfectly for free. Noxious Revival is a card that we kind of from the Breach list, most people had thrown it in, and it seems like which is kind of good enough anyways outside of Breach. There's another free spell, which is nice. Veil, Cycrypt, Snap, very broken in our Cradle deck. This town ain't big enough I know it's a weird looking card, but it does enable some pretty interesting loops, like Eternal Witness, Candelabra. With this town ain't big enough, if Candle's tapping for enough, you can just loop those things. You throw in a Kitten or a Dowerport Mage or anything else, there's tons of different weird little loops you can do with this town ain't big enough. Plus, it's just a pretty good card. And just use it to like bounce a rock and a clone or something, like resetting stuff. Or again, use it on like one of your rocks and then it's something you have to get rid of that's disruptive. It could be mana neutral or mana positive. This is just a really powerful card that I think more decks could run. And we just get to use it to go infinite with a whole bunch of different things. 13 artifacts, relatively low count, fast mana, Candelabra of Tawnos, one of the best cards in our deck because we are Cradle, 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 Cradle. We can potentially untap basically 4 Cradles with this. Expedition Map finds those guys Cradles or untappers. Skull Clamp, like I mentioned, I don't know if I got to talk about like the list that I had started running my first token build. I added in the Skull Clamp. It's been pretty good. It goes from just okay if you're clamping Roger. It still feels like a pretty good rate to just draw 2 and like recast and draw 2 again. And then it gets to absolute broken insanity when you're like Chatterstorming and you have an Earthcraft or going mana neutral, draw like 16 cards or mana positive if you have like a Wild Growth on the line. Like it goes absolutely insane. The floor is pretty strong. The ceiling is very, very high. And the utility of get it off Urza Saga, get it off Trinket Mage, whatever, is just lines up perfectly, I think. Soul Ring, Springleaf Drum, Relic of Legends, not at its best, but it's still pretty good as one of the faster mana enablers, like similar to Crypto Threat Effect and Earthcraft. Machine Gods Effigy, Sam's just pretty high on clones. I'm very high on them too. Machine Gods is a card I've thought about because I often found I would just cast this thing anyways and just ignore Devoted Druid being in my deck. I don't really like Devoted Druid right now anyways. Machine Gods is pretty good. It's basically a 3 mana clone. It's very nice that it is not a creature itself. So if you copy a Bowmasters, it's kind of like the Imposter Mech deal, but you also get to target your own stuff, which is like a huge upside over Imposter Mech. I don't think I would run Imposter Mech above Machine Gods Effigy. I might add it in addition, but being able to clone your own things is very huge. And then the One Ring, we're very good at doing One Ring stuff because we can Manamo untap it, Candle untap Manamo, untap One Ring. Enchantments, pretty much staples of the deck at this point. Mystic Ristic, Earthcraft, Growing Rights to get another Cradle effect. Wild Growth is just pretty good, and if you're untapping a land, it lines up even better. Cryptolith Right, these effects are just quite strong. Sam is also on Storm Chaser's talent, which he said to me was just like, you could cut it, you could run it. It's just pretty good. It's 1 mana, make a creature. If you flicker it, you get more creatures, so that can be some decent upside. And then it does have the potential to do combo loops. You can do things with this town ain't big enough to loop it, which is like what they do in standard. Or it can just return something and kind of win you the game or be mana positive or neutral. Just like a pretty okay card that lines up with a lot of what the deck is doing. 28 lands. I mentioned that most of this is kind of standard-ish for the Simic focus builds. Sam likes Flooded Grove over like another basic, although he did add another basic island, which is the basic you usually prioritize because you kind of lean in on Cradle getting the green mana, and then Earthcraft you want to be getting you blue mana if you get to do Earthcraft. Dryad Arbor is a new addition. This is one that's kind of been talked about. I'm not so sure about it. Sam said he just kind of fetched for it if it made sense. It's a land that increases your Cradle count. You can Skull Clamp it. It does die to Bowmasters. That is definitely a thing. It's a card to think about. I'm probably going to test it at least and get a feel for it. I'm not sure if it's going to stay in the list. I have been in scenarios and I've kept track of like when I would like to Green Sun Zenith for 0. It comes up sometimes. Green Sun Zenith has become like just a really strong card in the deck, and Dryad Arbor would be a nice little thing to add to that package. So it's something to think about. And then the rest is basically what we've been doing. Urza Saga, Talon Gates, a whole bunch of fetches, prioritizing green and blue fetches. Like we're not doing any red and we prioritize green. But yeah, Rogthras is a deck. Oh, also Frantic Search. This is when he was kind of mid-ish on. He just asked me about it, or we talked about it briefly at least, on taps lands. I mean, it's probably at least decent. I think like you could run like this or Ghostly Flicker, or I don't know, something like that. The card selection is also pretty relevant, but you do go card negative. That's kind of the downside. I think Rog Thras is very, very good. Sam straight up said that he thinks it's the best deck in the format. It's not even close. That it does the things that win games of Magic better than any other deck in the format, and I'm pretty inclined to agree with him, especially when I tested Breezecaller. After playtesting with this thing, I felt like I went into that event with just such a nerfed version of my deck by not running this card. I already, after the event, preferred my Simic build that I had played in like a smaller event before that and won. That was kind of like the best the deck had felt for me in a while. And that playing Breach and trying some red stuff just kind of reiterated to me that I preferred not doing that. How much of this stuff I want to implement, like the Druid or both of the basic land finders, I'm not sure, but I'm going to test at least a little bit of it because I'm always down to test stuff. And, you know, there's plenty of new stuff to do. Breezecaller, I think, is nuts. Magda the Candelabra, I think, is going to be quite good. I'm very excited for Rog Thras. I am super hyped. Now, I will give another disclaimer. This top 4 had some weirdness because the top 16 pods, all of them ended pretty quickly, except for one, as it usually goes. And the one that Sam was in that he won lasted about 4 hours. It was a very wild game. You can go watch it. There's some craziness. I know he was sharing it and telling people that he thought it's interesting to watch. There's some deals getting broken too, from what I heard. I fell asleep during it because it was like 2 or 3 a.m. Sam won that game, goes to his top 4 game, and says that he just wants to take a prize split, and the table negotiates for that. And Sam does not play and lets the other 3 players play for points. So this top 4 pod was won by the next player that we're going to be talking about. But I do want to say, whenever I know about weirdness in the top pods, I do like to let you guys know Sam was not in the top 4 game, is my understanding of it. Not going to discredit the winning deck, but keep in mind that this was a 3 pod at the end that did not include Sam, so there was no Rog Thras stuff going on. Just want to let you guys know that that's the case before we hop into our winning deck list. And the last deck we're going to be looking at is another Tymna Kraum, this time on 13 creatures. We do see the Oppo, no Facebreaker. Fairy Mastermind, again, seeming quite popular right now. A little bit different in the sorceries. We've got the Deluge, the Wheel, no Meme Bet, but we do have a Praetor's Grasp here. Instance, we got the Dispel, the Flood Mob, both the Red Blast, Swords, no Path. We do have Deadly Rollick showing up, Silence, Cabal Ret, no Culling the Weak either. Artifacts, we got Fast Mana, another deck that is on Mamber. It's started to become less of a staple in this list for sure. Heavier prioritization of Talismans. We got 4 Talisman effects, and then Wishclaw Talisman and One Ring. Enchantments, we do have the Copy Artifact and the Mirror Maid, so prioritizing those. Cloning of value engines, or just generally like parasitic-ish gameplay, although we, again, didn't see Metamorph, just Mockingbird is the only clone in the creatures, and then no Imposter Mech either down here. Breach, Tithe, no Necropotence, and then 27 lands. We are on the City of Traders and Forbidden Orchard. That's kind of interesting. Cavern of Souls as well, so a little bit going, and Undercity Sewers, so a little bit of interesting stuff going on in the mana base. City of Traders does point you in the direction of, you know, opting for more of these talismans, and yeah, so that makes sense. Undercity Sewers, Surveillance pop up every now and then. TNK, they're not super popular. You know, I hate Forbidden Orchard. Talking about other Cradle decks and nonsense like that, and Clone the Weeks and all this nonsense. But it's here. Fixes for mana, and this is your winner. Again, a little bit of weirdness in the top pod. I don't think there's anything else in the top 16 that I know of that I saw that was strange. You know, games ended quickly. You had players saying like, "Oh, he did this wrong, and that gave this person the win." That's Magic. That's how we do this thing. That's our multiplayer format. Andy's been on an absolute tear. The winner of this event, winning this amazing 10K event. Super sick stuff. Let me know down below what you think of the deck list here. I was so happy to get to go out to the Mana Vault. I would really, really love to get to go to more tournaments. If you're a tournament organizer or a potential sponsor and would like to help me get out to tournaments in, you know, exchange for getting to talk about some awesome stuff that you're doing, please let me know and reach out. I would love to try to get to do more of this stuff, especially if I'm not playing as much at events. I would like to be able to do more coverage on the scene to just get to show you guys more of what's happening at events. I don't like to do that when I play because it's hard enough for me to win games anyways, and I'm recording stuff too. You know, it's tough out here for people like me. But let me know what you're interested in, what you want to see from me next. I'm going to be working on the Rog Thras guide. I am starting it over. I could just throw an addendum at the end. Oh, also there's this, but I think stuff has changed enough and my list is going to get updated. So I would like to just restart on that. Forgive me if I'm slow on that. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you like, what you didn't, what you want next. So thank you for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.